Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fourth episode of the Internally Screening Podcast. I'm Rupert,
I'm Adam.
and today we're going to be talking about some films. We would normally talk about news at this point, but we're going to be doing a separate video for Milan, so there's no point discussing that here because we're going to have a nice, long, hearty discussion about that on another occasion. So we're just going to jump straight into reviews. So one of the most talked about films that's come out this year, and will probably remain to be one of the most talked about films, is the new Charlie Kaufman film, I'm Thinking of Ending Things, directed by... Well, he was originally a screenwriter, and I guess he's probably still best known for his collaborations with Spike Jonze, for which he... and also Michel Gondry, which he won his Oscar for the screenplay of Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, which I think you're a big fan of, and I'm a big fan of.
Huge fan of that, yeah.
Yeah, and so we agree on that. And his Spike Jonze stuff is kind of iconic at this point. So, but as a director, he's kind of different as a screenwriter. A lot of his scripts that get directed by other people tend to be more accessible, more crowd pleasing. But of the three films he's directed, now that he's taken to directing seemingly as his primary role in the industry, and also writing, but actually directing his own scripts now, he's become much more esoteric, and he seems to rub some people the wrong way, and but also just a complete adoration from certain circles within film snobs and cinephiles, which is still my least favourite word ever. But yeah, what did you think of? Oh, and this is on Netflix. That's another thing to mention. He's gotten on the Netflix train, so it's great to see the continuing trend of Netflix kind of just throwing money at anything.
Yeah.
Which I do kind of like.
I respect it. Yeah.
Yeah, we're just getting so much weird stuff, like mostly trash. Don't get me wrong, but also weird little bits like this. What did you think of it, Adam?
Well, I can't lie, I'm a little disappointed by it, which might shock you because going into this, you kind of recommended this to me as our film of choice in terms of new stuff to review, and I certainly enjoyed a lot of it. Like in terms of, I was gripped along for the ride, but I kind of got to the end and I felt a bit hollow about it, and I kind of did some reading around, and some of my problems with it seemed to be problems those that I didn't realize this was based off a book of the same name. Yeah. And a lot of people who have reviewed it from the perspective of someone who's read the book previously and then come to the film have similar problems with the film that I do. I want to try and explain myself a bit before we go into spoilers.
Sure.
But it's a bit of a hard one because the film, like you say, the film is very esoteric, and I guess there are large stretches of kind of conversations and it all seems very detailed, kind of like train of thought type writing that's simultaneously very interesting and kind of different about this kind of movie, but also kind of frustrating in a similar way, in that things feel like they're going to develop somewhere, and then 20 minutes later you're still kind of in the same place.
Sure.
I'm finding it hard to say it without spoiling anything. What did you think before we go into spoilers and stuff?
Well, I mean, I really, really, really liked it. It's I guess maybe this is the first Charlie Kaufman directed film you've seen, right?
What other ones has he directed? I mean, I've seen a few.
Synecdoche, New York, and Anomalisa. Those are the only other two he's
done.
But
in which case, no, I've not seen. I've of his writing stuff, I've seen Being John Malkovich and Eternal Sunshine. And I love Eternal Sunshine. It's one of my favourite films. Easily the best romantic film. In strong contention with Her. But, that film is up there. And being John Malkovich, whilst again not a film I didn't really connect with, but I kind of loved all the weird, bizarro ideas of it. It was very entertaining on the writing side of it, and probably a film I'd enjoy a lot more when I come back to it. But I respect it more than I like it, I'll say. And I guess I could say the same thing of this film.
I guess I was a bit more. I knew what to expect a little bit more from it, because so the first film I saw of Charlie Kaufman's was Synecdoche, New York, which is similarly detail oriented and like intense and difficult to understand fully on a first watch. This is kind of at the same time like more accessible and less accessible than that. It's Synecdoche, New York is more accessible than this in that it's higher concept and has that kind of appeal to it, whereas this is like, without spoiling it, a much more insular film and much more low stakes, dealing with pretty much the exact same themes as that film, but in like a very, very different way. It's kind of less accessible in that it's going to turn a lot of people off because it's boring, right? But I didn't find it very boring personally, because I knew to be on the lookout for lots of visual cues, details. I knew there was going to be lots of kind of awkward conversations, sort of off the wall humor, and very kind of philosophical dialogue at points. And I mean, for a start, I thought all of the acting was amazing. And without spoiling it, I think what's her name, the main actress?
Jessie something.
Jessie Buckley.
Yeah.
Jessie Buckley, who I've only seen in one other thing, I believe. It was a music bar pick called Wild Rose, which was pretty average, but she was phenomenal in it. She blew me away in this. Given the role that she has, again, without spoiling it, I think she lent a lot of. She did a lot of legwork in making her character really fleshed out and interesting.
Yeah.
When it could have potentially been it's a very difficult role to play, very challenging. I also liked, obviously, Toni Collette and what's his name?
David Thewlis.
David Thewlis. Both of those guys, both of them were just. I mean, everything in the house was kind of hilarious, and I loved the shifts in it in terms of it kind of starts out quite unassuming, and then it becomes quite horror-ish in a way.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And
then it kind of it becomes even more depressing, and then you have this weird abstraction towards the end, and I don't know. It's certainly a lot to take in on one watch, and it's something that I'm probably going to rewatch pretty soon, because I know there's probably a lot of detail I missed out on. I was picking up a lot of stuff while watching it, and I was sort of trying to decode it as I was watching it, but it's quite difficult to do that with this kind of film, because Charlie Kaufman isn't the kind of writer or director who's going to hold your hand through this kind of stuff and explain anything outright. I know he's actually done a Q&A or something on this film.
Okay.
I'm going to avoid it because that kind of spoils it for me. I don't really want to know what he thinks it means. But like, I don't know. I was totally into it. I mean, my only real complaint is I thought there were points where it got like some of the abstraction towards the end, of which I won't spoil. It felt a bit overly weird, and I don't know how I felt about some of it. But
I think I know exactly what you mean.
But there are other parts of that I did really, really like, and I thought was really well done. But again, I don't want to spoil it. So
right. So I guess now we'll go into full spoilers. But if you are into really weird, for a start, if you're into Charlie Kaufman, anything he's written, absolutely watch it. And if you're into weird, sort of more off-kilter films with like not necessarily traditional storylines or traditional plot arcs, then this is definitely something that will tickle your fancy. So go watch that. Go watch it before spoiling it for yourself. But okay, we are about to do that. So I guess kind of a brief kind of rundown of the plot. So
if you can do that.
Okay, so it kind of, for me, there's kind of 4 or 5 distinct pieces of the story, and they all kind of take place in different locations. You have
Yeah.
the initial drive with Jessie Buckley and Jesse Plemons, boyfriend and girlfriend, driving to his parents' house for a first meeting of the families. Then you know, in the car, she's sort of internally monologuing about how she the film begins with the film's title, I'm thinking of ending things, and it's like her kind of going through her like her depressed innermost thoughts, but also trying to strike up conversation with her boyfriend, who's like desperately trying to like maintain some kind of connection with her, even though she's all in her own head. Then they get to his house. A bunch of weird shit happens there that I want to break down in more detail, because that's probably my favorite part of the film. It's the bit where you get the most sort of, for me, the juiciest sort of nuggets of like, all right, what's really going on here? Like these sorts of really mysterious elements are properly introduced. You suddenly start realizing what you're watching isn't necessarily grounded in reality. Then we come back to the car.
They have an Oreo burr, which I didn't know was a thing, but
also I guess it's 4 parts, not 5 parts. Sorry. So yeah, they come back to the car. They spend more time in that, but this time it's at night. Yeah, they have like ice creams and stuff. The conversation gets a bit more weird than it was the first time. Yeah. And then at the end, they end up at a school where the sort of climax happens.
And running throughout this is an alluded to B plot of sorts.
Yes.
Of a janitor sort of doing pretty menial tasks, which for me, there's a lot of kind of visual cues to it.
Yeah.
And I got a hint of what it was going to be, because I knew what to expect going into this film, and I knew that everything was going to mean something. So in the beginning, they pass by a swing set, which you see right at the beginning of the film outside this janitor's house. And there's actually a very brief weird interaction with Jessie Buckley and the janitor from a window with some kind of muffled dialogue. So I kind of thought, well, there's clearly something going on here. And then as you get into the house, the bit where I realised what was going on was when they're looking at family pictures, and he goes, she looks at the picture, goes, oh, who was this? And it's a picture of like a small kind of ginger child.
Yeah.
And he goes, oh, that was me. And she says, no, that's me.
Yeah.
And then it kind of gets interrupted, and they kind of move on from it very quickly. And from there, so I guess the initial twist, which isn't really a twist, it's kind of, I would call it like a spoiler, but I don't know if it's really a twist that she is, we were kind of in the janitor's head. He's imagining this scenario.
Well, I would say that is the kind of core twist of the film. Yeah.
I mean, I'd say there's a later twist that was more significant to me. That initial twist is more, again, to me, it felt like kind of part of the setup,
right? And
immediately kind of explained the weirdness, so that the rest of the house scene, you're not. I mean, it didn't. A lot of the weirdness in the house wasn't annoying to me in any way, because I knew why. This is genuinely like in someone's head, which is quite an overdone twist. But I thought, this film isn't. It's not like Fight Club or something like that, because you can't really do the Fight Club twist again. It's one of those twists that's so popular and well known. Whenever a film does this person doesn't actually exist twist, it's very difficult to get that same effect after such a big popular film has done it. Whereas this, it's kind of, to me, it felt kind of baked into the setup. Yeah. And it kind of informs the rest of the film. And then there's the later twist at the school bit, which again you can kind of suspect is the case, but I guess we'll get to that. Yeah, the house bit. What did you like about the house bit? I kind of liked how horror-y it was.
Yes.
I really like the... Sorry, before I let you speak. I just want to say, the whole bit, it was like a very brief moment, really, but I love the bit where they were in the barn and they're talking about the pig.
Oh, and like the fact that it's been eaten alive by maggots and stuff.
Yeah, something about that was
super
just...
sinister, yeah.
It was so atmospheric, man.
And they're just talking around like a patch of blood on the ground. And then weirdly later on, like a cartoonized version of this pig is a kind of like metaphorical like spirit guide appears.
Yeah, that was a bit strange for me.
That was fucking
sure.
weird. A kind of cool bit of imagery, but whether it really works with the story, that's definitely up for, you know,
I don't know how I felt about that bit.
Each individual viewer. So for me, the reason the house scene is so, or the house act of the film is so was the most gripping for me, was because like I said, it was where the mystery really kind of establishes itself. Toni Collette and David Thewlis are so unhinged. Like it's like straight because of Toni Collette, kind of a Hereditary comparison immediately popped into my head. Like she is as unhinged as her character in Hereditary is at the end of the film. Like she's sort of laughing at nothing.
She's like that character sort of in the process of recovery from Hereditary.
Right, yeah. And both like David Thewlis's character initially has like a plaster on his head, like he's had a head wound. And from the moment, so they have like a really uncomfortable dinner together, and a lot of the stuff that she says about herself when she's like introducing herself is stuff that then the mother starts saying about Jake, Jesse Plemons' character, and it immediately started making me think, well, one, both of them are acting incredibly strangely. Do they both have Alzheimer's? And if they've both got Alzheimer's, and we're in this kind of like weird Charlie Kaufman story, is what we're seeing happening in someone's mind who has Alzheimer's. And that's kind of what happens. It's not quite as like cut and dry as, oh, he has a mental illness, but it is kind of along those lines. And then, like you say, then they go back into the room, into the living room. She sees a picture that she believes is herself, but then she's told it's not. And then
there's the dog that's like glitching
the dog
out
that
as well.
doesn't. That's yes. That's even. In fact, the first time that happens is even before the dinner, and that was my first kind of inkling of what the fuck is this? Like
very strange detail.
They mention a dog. He mentions a dog. As a fuck, how does it? So I've forgotten.
He says, "Oh, this is the dog." Then we have a dog. She's like, "Oh, that's strange." Like,
because she
dog...
doesn't. That's what it is. It's. Oh yes, he's trying to not let her go down the basement, and the basement has weird scratch marks on the door. And then she's like, "What the fuck does he have the scratch marks on the door for?" Which is proper horror movie shit. That's where it really starts like hinting at horror stuff. Yeah. And then he's like, "Oh, we got a dog," and she's like, "I don't see a dog. I don't smell a dog. There's no dog toys." And then the moment he says they have a dog appears, and it shakes its head, but then doesn't stop shaking, and the camera never focuses on it when the dog has stopped. So we, the viewer, never see the dog as like a proper form. Because
I guess maybe it makes sense that maybe the janitor is like he can't
remember the dog because, as we see later, I mean, obviously, you know, the janitor's elderly, and we're seeing stuff that's happening sort of in the past, I suppose.
Or he's imagining it.
But then you see in the Jake's childhood bedroom, there is an urn with the dog in it.
Yeah.
So that kind of unravels that mystery. And yes, so there's a point at which our main character is at the window looking at how bad the weather's getting, turns around and everyone's gone from the room. And then she goes upstairs and finds a far more aged version of Jake's father. And that's when it's confirmed that we are in some kind of fantastical reality where time is blurring. She walks from room to room, and characters have aged differently and are talking about Jake in different ways from different perspectives along the timeline of his life.
There's a lot of like purposeful continuity errors as well.
Yeah.
Like people change clothes a fair bit, just randomly. A lot of like the cutlery and the stuff they're eating at the dinner table starts to just change at
Oh,
points.
does it? Oh, that's a nice touch. I didn't notice that.
Lots of weird little touches like that. I don't know. I mean, again, it's with Charlie Kaufman. There's almost certainly a reason for it. And if I went back and looked over the scene, I could probably start to like unravel the Rubik's cube that this film is.
Right.
But off the top of my, first watch, I didn't take any notes for this film because I tried to at the start, and I realised
I kind of did the same. I got to like the house bit, and I was like, everything I typed was like trying to predict what the fuck was going on. I wasn't really writing about what I was seeing, but what I was like think was gonna happen.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
exactly.
yeah.
I love the scene with him talking to Jesse Buckley in Jake's room. There was something. I mean, it was so grim. And
the performance is amazing. He's
a very underrated actor.
Massively. For those that aren't familiar, David Thewlis is probably most famous for playing Remus Lupin in Harry Potter.
Yeah.
And certainly all I knew him from for years and years and years. He's a very underrated actor. He
collaborated with Charlie Kaufman for Anomalisa as well.
Yes.
One of the 3 people that have voices in that film. So he was fantastic in it. Toni Collette's like always good, really.
Yeah.
Like she's in such a great career renaissance now. She was I mean, and then they also have a lot of time switching in the house. Like there's the bit where she comes downstairs and Toni Collette
she's
is
young again.
She's young again. She's talking about Jake like a kid.
Yeah.
And like her role in the scene becomes very strange. She stops being like Jessie Buckley stops being uncomfortable at one point, and she starts like serving the food, which was very strange to me. Like when she starts serving stuff.
Yeah, her characterization entirely changes. Yeah.
And then I mean the whole house scene is like it's very fever dreamy, which I think it was kind of meant to be. Like it's very disconcerting the way it's edited. There's the bit where she goes down to the basement and it becomes really quite just like jarring. And but what's she doing?
She goes down and he's like telling her not to go down to the basement because something down there is like either embarrassing to him or whatever. But he's like really muffled, like like you would get in like an action film where someone's like let off a flashbang or something. Yeah. And she then looks back down the staircase and then back up to him, and then he's gone, and it's just like snow from outside, but it's still inside. And she discovers the paintings that at dinner she had previously been showing the family as works of her
own
are actually pictures that Jake had done. Pictures he had done, which were copies of another like real life but relatively unknown artist. So I guess it one speaks of his own ability, but his inability to be like truly creative. Perhaps that could be that's probably up for interpretation, but that's kind of
when she shows the paintings to David Lewis. He kind of reacts with like a lot of. He doesn't really like the paintings.
Yes.
So I suppose it's kind of supposed to be like, oh, his father didn't approve of that side of him, because he says like, oh, she tries to explain these paintings are landscapes and you're supposed to infer how you feel from the landscape, and he's just kind of bluntly saying, well, how am I supposed to relate to it if there's not someone in the picture I can relate to?
Yeah.
And then things only get weirder from there, because then you have the drive back where the conversation is there's a relatively normal conversation on the way there.
Yes.
But then you have the drive back where like they start referencing a John Cassavetes film, which I haven't seen. There's a bit where one of my favorite bits in the film is where Jesse Plemons is having like a breakdown about how when you die nothing happens, and you just kind of spend your life waiting for.
Yeah, that was very emotional. Yeah, he's fantastic in the film as well. We haven't really talked about his performance.
Every time I see him in something, he's great.
Famous as Todd from Breaking Bad. Is it Todd?
He's in Game Night as well. He's got great comedy chops, but he really did. He's a perfect cast for this film because he's got that kind of awkward, stilted. Like mannerisms so nailed down, and he fits the role so well.
Something that's kind of incidental, I guess, but really freaky to me is I think like a sort of current day Jesse Plemons to me looks very much like a later day Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Yes.
And they've collaborated previously. So, and obviously, he's tragically passed now. So seeing him in the film almost has like a ghostly element to it, just pure coincidentally. I mean, maybe Charlie Kaufman is clever enough to have chucked that in to make it extra kind of, add that extra layer into it. But
he would.
Perhaps but then again, it could just be coincidence.
I mean, this is kind of off topic, but watching Synecdoche, New York, that deals with a lot of these themes, probably deals with death specifically even more than this film. Watching Philip Seymour Hoffman in that, knowing what the horrible thing that happened with him, is like really quite eerie.
Yeah.
And there's the same kind of. I mean, I just hope everyone in this film it goes on to live a very long time, because it would be much more difficult to watch this film if someone from this cast dies now,
right,
too soon. Yeah,
because it's got that ghostly atmosphere to it. It would be eerie.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the interaction with the girls at the ice cream shop.
Well,
so
sorry, just to like wrap up the driving bit. Sorry to cut in, but there was one interesting bit. Earlier you brought up the fact that there's a moment at the dinner where Jessie Buckley, her character, suddenly changes her kind of attitude.
The bit where they change the actor for like.
No, they don't change the act. Oh, wait, what?
There's a bit in the car where like she's a different actress.
Nah.
It's like for a second, it's very weird.
Is it?
Yeah.
I did not notice that. I was just going to briefly talk about. There's a couple of things I've just remembered actually. So at dinner, she suddenly starts acting out of character and starts being really bubbly, loud, and giving dinner around. Yeah. And she's suddenly got loads of confidence, even though she's talking about killing herself in her head. And then she, in the car, they're talking about that film. And suddenly she starts talking in a different accent, like a more sort of old-timey accent. And in my head, I was like, oh, the guy whose head this is in is reading a review for a film or something. Because there's a cutaway at one point
he's watching the film.
He's watching a film, and it's like directed by Robert Zemeckis, which is like
that's a
great joke.
I burst out laughing at that.
That's like the one really genuinely like funny moment of the film for me. Like everything else is like hilarious. Awkwardly funny. That was just like genuinely like bizarre and hilarious.
That was such a slam dunk. I would love to be in a room with Charlie Kaufman watching Forrest Gump. That would be right. That would be great.
It was just because like he's watching some like really like hokey, emotional like love story, but so they'd already cut away to something that was happening outside in reality that seemed to be affecting the kind of love story within his head. So yeah, it seemed to me like the character was like manifesting as like a review he was reading.
I mean, I didn't think of that, but it makes sense.
Because yeah, she changes her accent. She kind of gets this weird like old timey reporter voice, like from the 30s, like see that kind of like. And now we have this opinion, and then there's the whole.
I remember her doing that.
There's the whole phone thing where she keeps getting calls from people with her own name, and then in the film people keep getting her name wrong, and then when they get her name wrong, she gets a phone call from a person with the same name. So it's like a catalogue.
I still don't know what to make of that. I don't know if it was like supposed to be him reminding himself of her name. Maybe
something like that. Apparently I've read somewhere that in the book it resolves. There's like the voice, she's being left voicemails by the janitor, and the janitor keeps saying something like there's just one question you have to remember, and the film never answers what the question is. But I don't know if I should mention what the book says if you'd rather not know. But
it's not. I mean, to me, it's not really that relevant to the film, right?
Yeah, I guess. Well, it kind of is, but I guess it's not relevant in that the film doesn't do it. But the line itself would have tied in well to the film had they decided to use it, because the question is simply, "What are you waiting for?" Because the idea that he's longing for a romantic entanglement with this woman that he's been unsuccessful at getting. But anyway, you were talking about the girls at the ice cream
Yeah.
shop.
So there's the bit. So they show up. There's two girls who are basically unresponsive. They're in the school play that the janitor is watching. The two
Yes,
girls
yes.
there. They're like on stage as he's like clearing up and he's sort of semi-watching, and they're basically like unresponsive. They're kind of just there, which is quite eerie.
She
And then
he gets Jesse Buckley's character to order for him because he says something like, "Oh,
yeah,
they won't do it if they know it's me," because he's like shy and intimidated by them.
sure, yeah. He says because he remembered that there were going to be girls there. So I don't know because they were dressed in like 50s outfits.
Yeah.
I don't know if like he was remembering these girls from the play as girls that he knew from school or something, maybe something like that.
Yeah,
Who
that makes sense.
ignored him or whatever. And then, but so there's a bit where Jesse Buckley's interacting with this more shy, less conventionally attractive, I guess, girl with like a rash, and she has this little thing where she starts talking about how we think of ourselves moving through time, but really time moves through
around.
us, which is a great line. And she's just kind of saying it. And Jesse Buckley doesn't know how to respond. And then there's like a brief second where, to pay for it, Jesse Plemons puts money down with his hand and pulls it back. And in that shot of his hand, he also has a rash
Right.
on his hand.
I see.
So I guess the implication is that that girl is him, which seems odd. But if you've seen many Charlie Kaufman films, you'll know that there is like a lot of gender swapping type stuff that goes on. There's a whole subplot in Synecdoche, New York, where they call Philip Seymour Hoffman kind of is referred to as a by a woman's name, and there's the bit in Being John Malkovich where John Malkovich is being called Lottie by a woman, and he's into it. There's a lot of that kind of.
Okay.
There's those kind of themes going on, so I don't know.
And I guess you could definitely you could draw further parallels in this film in that Lucy's character, as she starts off as being known,
yeah, true.
she has memories of like his childhood in her. Like we don't know. It's initially hard to know who is whose mind we are kind of living in. Are we living in Lucy's mind or in Jake's mind? Because obviously following Lucy as the protagonist, we would instantly or at first assume that we are in her head because we're experiencing things from her point of view, but then it seems more apparent that it's Jake. So there is that kind of blurring the lines there, that they're kind of very similar people.
Yeah, I mean it's hard to tell, but then I guess we then get to the school. So Jesse Plemons insists on going to this school despite Jesse Buckley's protestations that she just wants to go home. The weather at this point has picked up horribly.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There's like a snowstorm the whole film, by the way, that we've not really mentioned.
I guess that kind of sets the mood, right?
Yeah.
It's just constantly snowing. It's quite kind of dainty and nice at the beginning where she stood outside in the snow and she
it's romantic.
Sticks her tongue out and the snowflake lands on her. You know, she's like, she enjoys it, and then by the end it's just miserable. He kind of like disappears out of the car and she's stuck in it. She gets locked out of the car and she's like freaking out and she's annoyed. And then this is the second twist I was talking about. So she goes into the school, she encounters the janitor from the B plot, just kind of going about his business.
Yeah.
And she has this monologue where she kind of explains, earlier in the house she told the story about how she met Jake at a quiz night, and about how she liked him despite his kind of dorky awkwardness, and comes up with this kind of quite slowly comes up with this kind of cutesy story about how they met, and then she then gives what I suppose is supposed to be the real story to the janitor, so him kind of explaining to himself that it was actually just a very brief interaction, and she just she encountered him and kind of just spoke to him out of sort of pity in a way, and she didn't want to be mean, so she was being friendly, but she wasn't interested at all. And what she gave him her number, or she didn't give him her number, I can't remember. And I mean, I was kind of expecting that second twist, but I just thought the execution of it, and like Jessie Buckley, I mean, she's essentially, this is what was so impressive to me about her performance. She's literally playing a badly remembered version of someone,
like an imaginary girlfriend, an entirely imaginary thing.
And like her character is just like so human and like completely real in all of her mannerisms and the way she talks. And you know, she never really drops a beat. There were no points where I was like unconvinced by her. She's like, she doesn't overact, but I absolutely loved her performance in it, and I thought that particular monologue was just amazing.
Yeah.
And then there's the weird dance sequence,
right,
which I also thought was great.
The dance sequences like would have been, in my mind, a really cool way of closing, but it kind of lingers on a little bit beyond that. But it kind of surmises the story up so far. It's almost like a clarification of what's really happened, but without words. My interpretation of it. So again, earlier in the film, the janitor sees two people dancing in the hallway, rehearsing for this school play, and then they like bump into a locker and he moves on. And then in this, they're like dancing around, and it's more elegant. There are locker doors that are open, and they like in the middle of the dance hall and like close them delicately and things like that.
Nice long take as well.
Yeah, it was really like well shot.
Like they disappeared as well. I like the Jesse Plemons, and
they're replaced by like dancers that kind of resemble the characters but are clearly meant to be metaphorical versions, which really works for the scene because we are watching. Like it makes it far more obvious that it's like metaphorical and a fantasy. Even though interpretive dance sounds like such a pretentious wankery way to end a film, especially one like this, it actually it's probably the most grounded in reality the film ever becomes. So it's kind of like a nice counterpoint to what we've seen. Like we've seen a traditional kind of like sort of dialogue driven narrative that is bizarre and weird and we can't make head nor tail of it, and then you see a wordless dance piece that is way more easy to follow than anything we've seen in the film so far. Yeah,
it's kind of like a moment of clarity, isn't it? Yeah, no, I agree. I know, I love the dance sequence. I probably agree with you mostly that it probably would have been a better place to end the film, and if it would have ended there, I might have liked it a bit more, but I think I need to see it again before the following part after the dance.
Right.
I would have to. I need to watch it again before I know fully how I feel, because this. So we mentioned the pig. So,
yes.
I guess so. We cut to actual reality of the janitor leaving and getting into his car, right? And then I guess it's implied he's sort of having a heart attack in his car.
Yes, because he starts taking off all his clothes and he's like
breathing heavily.
Yeah, he's really hot and he's uncomfortable. Yeah.
And he's like, and then we see an animated pig, the pig from earlier that was eaten inside out by maggots.
Yeah, and I think there is a point earlier where this pig is like a cartoon on a billboard as well.
I didn't notice that, but I believe you.
So it's not. It was definitely not the first time I saw the pig, but it was the first time you see it in quite the way that they do it at the end, where it's like fully moving and it's in shot and stuff like that.
I guess maybe it's him seeing something that he remembers from his childhood.
Yes,
but it's also in reference. I mean, again, everything in this is very symbolic and kind of cryptic. And then he walks the janitor into the school, kind of explaining life and death from the pig's perspective.
Right.
And then there's a sequence with the aged characters and other characters from the film all in the audience. Jesse Plemons gives a speech and has a musical number on stage, looking aged. And everyone in the audience looks very, very strange. They stand up to applaud for him.
Comical age. It's like where previously in the film, we know the film has been able to make people look old because we've seen excellent, like truly excellent makeup on Tony Collette and David
Yeah.
Thewlis. Like,
Oh yeah,
honestly,
the stuff on David Thewlis was
unreal.
incredible.
Like,
yeah.
I couldn't believe how good that looked. That's maybe the most realistic old people makeup I've ever seen. Kind of breathtaking. But then, yeah, at the end, it's like a very comical kind of.
They have like googly eyes.
It's drawn, it's painted on wrinkles, and it's kind of it's evocative of like. I can't quite think what
He looks like a zombie,
old
like from a
stage
Hammer
plays.
film or something.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah, like an old Hammer horror zombie. Yeah, that exact kind of thing. Where it's more like the implication of at the time it would have been a limitation of what they could do with makeup, but
it makes you notice it.
Yeah, it's kind of like a placeholder almost. Like so it's almost as though whilst he's up on stage, they're all kind of on stage because they're all kind of dressed up as like pretend characters.
Yeah, and he gives like a obviously kind of a bitterly ironic song about how he's gonna find love and be successful, and then he bows on stage and everyone has a standing ovation. It's quite it's quite depressing. I mean, yeah, but I mean, like overall, I thought the film was just. Again, I feel like I almost don't feel like my opinion of it is solid yet because I know I need to watch it again.
Yeah.
And I'm very keen to watch it again and kind of decode it a bit more. But for the most part, I thought all the acting was great. I thought it was really, really well shot. It's actually shot by a Polish cinematographer who's worked with one of my favorite directors. The cinematographer's name is Lukas Zal, and he's worked with Paweł Pawlicki or something. I probably completely butchered that, but really, really good cinematographer. I really appreciated that, especially like in the car scenes, where it's essentially just cut back. It was never boring for me to watch.
They had like a lot more than just the two angles.
Exactly. There was a lot of thought put into where the camera was at any time.
There was like internal stuff. Then there was like external stuff. A kind of hypnotic rhythm of like the windscreen wipers constantly going. And
really well edited.
Yeah, at least like 6 different shots minimum, like that they would cut to and from.
Yeah. It was. I mean, and the direction was good. I guess this is probably like more pantomime-y, which was kind of off-putting at first for me, but then with the reveals kind of made sense to me. Some of the dialogue is quite stilted and awkward, whereas in a lot of Charlie Kaufman films you've had that before, but it's often more natural than this. This felt specifically more stilted, almost like in a Yorgos Lanthimos way at points, particularly in the house.
That's a great comparison, yes, for sure.
Yeah. Which again, as I said, first bugged me, but I don't really mind so much now. But yeah, I really liked it. I'd give it like an 8 out of 10. There was I need to watch it and dissect it more and sit on it, think about it, and get more depressed before I don't have a fully formed. But this is my proto opinion of the film.
Yeah, well, I guess I'll probably be offering up much the same. I mean, over the course of this discussion, it has kind of made me appreciate the film a lot more. When I left the film. Finished watching it, I was kind of in two minds. So again, I'll give like a tentative 6, maybe a 6.5. And much of that kind of revolves around tone, I guess. I found I kind of get the purpose of it, but the 2 car scenes we have go on very long. Uncomfortably long, and the uncomfortableness is kind of part and parcel of the atmosphere this film is trying to make, but there also feels like there's a kind of mystery element to the film that we as the viewer are trying to decode, and that aspect of it, which is something we get more so at the house, which as I said was my favorite bit, is so much more interesting of a plot line or of an aspect of the film for me. When we get into the car, everything slows down, and at points it kind of became excruciating. But you know what? It is the sort of film that I could be entirely persuaded is a total masterpiece, and I understand
Mhm.
that there are a lot of people out there that do think of this as a masterpiece and will be in a lot of people's top films of the year.
I mean, it's my favourite of the year so far. Not that there's been much competition.
No, there hasn't. I was looking over it. Like, it's been quite dire. But yeah, you know what? You could convince me on a good day. Like, after a second watch, yeah, maybe I will come back to this and go, fuck yeah, it's a masterpiece. But for now, it definitely a film you need to watch a couple times to kind of soak in. And if you don't have the patience for it after the first watch, then yeah, maybe you'll just end up like me.
I mean, I'll say I watched Synecdoche, New York for a second time, and I enjoyed it much more on the second time.
Okay.
It's the Charlie Kaufman, the Charlie Kaufman aesthetic and style is. I feel like it's a lot to digest, especially on initial view, and that happened to me when I first watched Synecdoche, New York. I kind of thought I was going in for a dark drama that was going to be very depressing,
Right.
but I didn't quite know how insane it really gets.
Right.
So I can imagine this is probably, and as I said, this is probably potentially his least accessible film out of the three he's done. So, yeah, I mean, for you, I'd recommend definitely rewatch it, but maybe watch Synecdoche, New York, and Anomalisa first, and maybe then you'll get a taste for it.
Well, he's certainly a very interesting writer and director. Like, if there's one thing you couldn't say for his output, on the whole, it's very interesting. It's very like
It's not forgettable.
No, like there are aspects of this film I found to be a bit boring, but as a whole concept, as like a whole piece, it's pretty gripping. I just wish it was kind of tightened in a few places, I guess.
Sure. Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, I guess if you watch it with like the context, knowing what a lot of the stuff that happens, maybe like you'll notice more.
Yeah, you kind of watch it like going through and picking out all the details that you missed the first time. So yeah, I'm willing to admit I'm wrong if I am.
I guess we'll find out.
Yeah.
Right.
Right, and the second film we're going to talk about tonight is the 1992 Dracula film by none other than Francis Ford Coppola. His last really big sort of project out there in the world, and it is kind of from an era of Hollywood films, a bygone era, if you like, of where these big directors were just kind of let loose to do whatever they felt like, and Dracula has the unbridled glee of just a child in a sweet shop, like doing whatever they want, picking out whatever elements and story ideas that he felt like. Just, it is one of the most sort of pantomime-ish films I have seen in maybe ever, maybe it's certainly in a long time. It's got an absolutely insane cast, bolstered by two amazingly hammy performances by Gary Oldman as Dracula and Anthony Hopkins as Van Helsing, who's doing a wonderfully like goofy, like cod Dutch accent for much of the film. It also has unconvincing accents brought to you by Keanu Reeves as Jonathan Harker and the slightly better but still a little bit off Winona Ryder, who is also significantly better as an actor, even if she's not. Yeah. Even if she doesn't quite hold a candle to the rest of the cast. You even got Carrie Yules is in here as well as like a supporting character. He is famous from like Princess Bride and Saw. I kind of love it whenever I see him in a film. His character from Princess Bride is like so synonymous with him. Every time he talks in a posh accent, I'm like, oh, here we go again. So I guess, well, fuck it, Rupert. What do you think of this film?
There's elements of this film that I love, like that I would rate individual elements of this film like a 10, or like individual parts of this film a 10.
Yeah.
But there's just like you said, it's kind of like if you got a toddler and he's just throwing painted sponges at a canvas, and some of it looks amazing, and then all the paints start melding together, and it kind of comes out a bit grey. Like, there's parts of it that just so don't work. You also didn't mention Tom Waits is in this film for some fucking reason.
Oh shit! Is he the guy that plays the mad guy?
in the asylum.
Oh fuck! I thought I recognised him.
It's
Christ.
one of the maddest casts. I mean,
oh, and Richard E. Grant. Richard E.
of
Grant
course,
is
Richard E.
like
Grant
the
for a
doctor
few
guy.
seconds.
He's excellent.
barely in it, but he's in it. It's a very, very 90s film, like you said. It's kind of ridiculously excessive, which I guess Coppola was kind of known for doing, like with the ridiculously over budget, kind of on set catastrophe, but eventual masterpiece that was Apocalypse Now. And you know, I guess in a way, the aesthetic of the Godfather films have that kind of excess, kind of exuberant quality to them. You know, very visually sumptuous and filled with like quality performances. This certainly has the visually sumptuous part. The quality performances we'll get to.
Yeah, quite. Well, it's all up to interpretation for the large part, I guess. I mean, how you like your campiness.
I just don't understand why they had Carrie Ewells and they cast him as not Jonathan Harker. Like,
that's actually heartbreaking. I hadn't even thought of that.
I've read that basically Keanu Reeves, Francis Ford Coppola said they kind of wanted like a pretty boy poster child to play Jonathan Harker because it's kind of like a thankless role in the film, which he's completely right there. And you know, he says like, oh, you know, whenever we'd be traveling, Keanu would be the one getting smothered with girls trying to get autographs and stuff.
Right.
Which I guess he's well cast in that sense. But like, I cannot avoid the opening of this film is really... I mean, well, I'll start with the prologue, because the prologue, for me, is the best part of the film. It's
the really campy, like, backstory to Dracula.
Yeah, which I want to briefly aside before I talk about it. I don't understand why this is called Bram Stoker's Dracula. It's called Dracula, just plain Dracula in some places where you look it up, but it's also called Bram Stoker's Dracula, as if this is supposed to be like...
A really faithful retelling.
Yeah, which when it opens up with, I'm pretty sure that, I mean, I haven't read the book, but I'm pretty sure the novel doesn't talk about a Transylvanian war-hungry prince
against like the Ottoman Empire and stuff.
But I love it. Like,
you would not be wrong in saying that the book does not cover that.
But yeah, like I love that whole bit. Like I love, the whole film feels like it's shot in a studio, which I kind of like. It kind of works.
Yes.
And I love like the really silhouette heavy Gary Oldman's ridiculous armor and like the kind of epic. It really, really reminds me of the Lord of the Rings prologue, which is like, you know, again, another one of my like favorite prologues.
That's a good shout.
It has like that, and especially with the absolutely fantastic score by, and I'm about to butcher this legendary Polish composer's name. His name is Wojciech, and I'm not even going to attempt the surname. I'm going to be honest, but his score throughout this is just perfect. I could listen to the score by itself; it's that good, and especially the opening song. I feel like it's one of those scores where you feel like you've already heard it because it's just so iconic.
And I think I have. Yeah, I think it must have been
used
played
in
around.
Other stuff. Yeah, because it's just so good, and it's kind of cool to get to see like a Dracula origin story in that way, and it's so campy. The bit where he's like stabbing the cross and all of the Christian idols start bleeding, and it has that like really ridiculous tone, and it's got that shot which we actually have in the slideshow of all of the people on spikes. Here it is, all of the people impaled, and it's got that kind of war scenery and that kind of everything's completely drenched in red and orange. I just that bit's amazing to me,
because in this he's like explicitly supposed to be like Vlad the Impaler, right? They make mention of the fact that he did all the things that Vlad the Impaler did.
Yeah, they kind of make him seem like a fallen hero, which is dubious to real history, I believe. But I think he was always kind of a bastard. But yeah, it's a really cool way to open the film. And then, this is my problem, you cut to fucking Keanu Reeves flirting with Winona Ryder, and it's excruciating just listening to it. And then like him interacting with Gary Oldman. We'll get to Gary Oldman's performance, but Gary Oldman's performance... His performance is so bad that it kind of drags down Gary Oldman's performance, because Gary Oldman, they're both being over the top, but one, and I love Keanu Reeves.
One is doing it deliberately and knows how to do it, and the other is doing it because he has no idea what he's doing.
I wanna find whoever was his dialect coach for this film, if he even had one, and fire them immediately again. retroactively, because
Yeah.
the poor guy just sounds ridiculous in this film. And as I said, I'm sure we both love Keanu. I don't actually even think he's a bad actor, but like this is just horribly, horribly miscast. And,
And
he just sounds so ridiculous next to Gary Oldman, like, you know, just chewing up the scenery, like literally chewing on the scenery at points, you know, like it's just such an awkward juxtaposition, you know.
Absolutely. I mean, he also, not only is his accent totally fucking off, like his American accent is bleeding through all over the place, but he also looks totally nonplussed by all these creepy things that are happening to him. And then there's the one...
He like sits down and he just starts eating like immediately. He's like, oh,
yeah,
a meal.
And like Gary Oldman is clearly doing loads of really like unnerving shit that is supposed to be reacted to in a certain way. And Keanu Reeves just looks like kind of vaguely concerned, and that's it. Until one point where he... is he like? There's the bit where he finds the harem of like his Dracula's brides.
Yeah.
And like Dracula appears before him. I think he's like gonna eat something or like eat a baby or something. And then suddenly he goes like, like he suddenly like remembers that he's acting, and he like does it all in one shot where his face like contorts, like it's dumb. It's fucking
It's
dumb.
like Nicolas Cage in The Wicker Man levels at points.
Yeah.
Like,
Except for even Nicolas Cage knows what he's doing.
I mean, thankfully, I guess he's not in that much of the film.
But for him to be at such a pivotal point of the film, it's not a great place to start. Basically, it's not. It could have derailed it, but they, you know,
it's a shame because like there's so many parts about the opening, a bit of the actual story, not the opening, like the opening of the film itself, that really work. I mean, it definitely is like paying a lot of tribute to the 30s film, which, you know, like the Bela Lugosi one, where that film. I mean, the best part of that film by far is that opening bit, where you have Bela Lugosi and that amazing set design, and Bela Lugosi's performance, and a more aptly cast Jonathan Harker, I guess. To bounce off of, and you got that like gothic architecture, and like the set design in this is amazing throughout, and so is the costume.
I
mean,
100%.
Gary Oldman looks a bit silly with his like heart-shaped hair.
When he's like really old. Yeah. You know what's funny about that, as a brief aside, is that the first time I saw that referenced in anything was in The Simpsons.
Oh yeah.
It was like a Treehouse of Horror where like Burns is dressed up as him.
Yeah.
So because I'd seen that first, I couldn't help but see like Monty Burns on screen, like as Dracula. I just thought that was funny.
I mean, the hair just looks a bit silly, but the actual makeup itself is pretty good. And like Gary Oldman,
and
I don't even know what to make of Gary Oldman's performance. It's in like such an amazing realm between good and bad that I just can't decide.
I agree with you. I think Gary Oldman, like I said, he knows exactly what he's doing. Like everything, Gary Oldman is the kind of guy that can like really like tone up a performance or tone down a performance. Like this would have been in an era where he was infamous for his like psychotic, deranged baddies, like from Leon and The Fifth Element. Like he was known for being this like outrageous over actor. So I think they kind of probably got him in to be like, yeah, do that shit.
Yeah,
I'm not sure the timeline of it, but you know, it was kind of like that was the vibe. You know,
apparently, I read he was terrifying on set. Apparently, he was like going through a divorce at the time, so he wasn't in a good mood a lot of the time.
Oh shit!
Apparently, Winona Ryder said like, oh yeah, Gary Oldman was like really scary to work with, but like, they've made amends now. It's all fine, but I can completely believe it. You know.
Yeah, fair.
He seems like a very intense guy.
I mean, I love his really schlocky like Eastern European accent at the beginning. That's wonderful. It's so it's so cartoonish that it kind of makes it almost more believable. Like if you try to do a more realistic like Eastern European accent in that kind of setting, I'd almost be there going like, oh, I'm not sure they nailed that, but him going like, oh yes, I want to suck your blood, like all that shit, like
I am almost Dracula.
Yeah, exactly. It like in a strange way adds authenticity to what they're doing.
He's completely knows what he's doing. Like he's completely read read the tone. I mean, like, to be fair, I think all of the actors have, in terms of like the tone is set fairly well. I mean, it's just that some of the actors are better at it than others.
Yeah.
I mean, again, if we're on the complaints train, which I always am, my other issue with this film, and I don't know if this is just because maybe the book is kind of, I mean, obviously it's been made 100 times, this film, but I think it might be like deceptively difficult to adapt in film setting, because one of the things that makes the kind of pacing and editing of this film a little jarring to me is that you don't really have a main character. I mean, the closest thing you have is Winona Ryder, right?
Yes.
Because you kind of set up Jonathan Harker and it's kind of like a twist, because it's like, nope, he's been enslaved for most of the film.
Yeah.
And then you have Winona Ryder, and then Winona Ryder, her character is properly introduced in one of the most like excruciatingly but like also hysterically weird scenes where she's reading The King
she's
and
reading
or
Arabian
Arabian
Nights, and
like,
there's like all the pictures of like sex
Kama
position.
Sutra, and then like I don't know who is it Sadie Holmes or something?
Is that the actress?
The other actress comes in, and they're like,
not familiar with her.
"Oh, have you ever been with a man?" And it's like, oh my god.
Yeah, it's so nail on the head. It really
so
feeds that pantomime atmosphere, like it's so cartoonish. But it's also it's done with like that kind of glee that like you can't take your eyes away from it. It doesn't matter that it's so cheesy, because thing is, whilst the source material of Dracula is actually quite sort of, there is a kind of campiness to it, I suppose, but there's a lot more horror to the original text than is present in this film. The sort of subsequent remakes, like the Hammer horror particularly, and I guess the Bela Lugosi original, not including like Nosferatu and whatever, they all kind of have a very cheesy atmosphere. There was because I guess kind of almost through the limitations of the age, like the Bela Lugosi film has fucking like bats on strings and stuff, and like the idea of like this cartoonish Eastern stereotype just coming into London and being like really overtly foreign, and that's kind of more of the theme of those films, is like the foreignness of his character. This film dives more strongly onto the sexual aspect, which is also present in the book, to be fair.
I do feel like this film is way more informed by the 30s film than the book.
Yes. Well, exactly. And like I say, like that kind of makes, I think that's probably why it's gone so campy.
Yeah.
If if it was really drawing on the book, it wouldn't have done that, I don't think.
It absolutely like justifies his existence, because it's like, it is a very different take. While it is like, it does feel like Francis Ford Coppola doing like his take on like the universal Hammer horror films of like the 50s and 60s, and obviously 30s when Dracula was out. It is like him doing his impression of that, which is, I said about everything feeling like it's on a set, which it was. It was largely on a set, and I do really, really love that there are basically no digital effects in this film. It's all practical, and there's a lot of like back projections and matte paintings, and
it has a lovely like lived-in feel. Even though you're on a set, it feels really visceral.
It's weirdly aged very well, because the effects must have felt dated at the time, but that's kind of the point, that it's very blatantly like an homage to those films.
You know what it kind of feels like? It kind of feels like the Tim Burton film that Tim Burton never made.
I guarantee you, Tim Burton, when he was in the cinema watching this film, was like kicking himself like, fuck.
He's like, fuck.
I wish I got this script. I would love to see a Tim Burton version of this.
I mean, it would have been the same fucking film. That's the thing, right?
Yeah, you're right.
That's the thing. Like, I mean, Tim Burton had already made a bit of a name for himself at this point. Like, so I wouldn't be surprised if that was like a fairly prominent influence, even if just coincidentally, like drawing on what was popular at the time, like Coppola just ended up.
Well,
like,
I just want to know who read that script and thought, "Oh, I'll give this to Francis Ford Coppola."
I know.
It seems
it's
so
not
weird.
the first name you'd think of, really.
Well, like, I read that. So when he first got handed the script, he was really heavily into making and editing The Godfather 3, and he wasn't. Apparently, they weren't expecting him to even read the script. But when it got handed to him, it lit him up. And he was like, "Oh, Dracula!" He always had a passion for it, and that's like that's completely key, because you can really tell that for the many flaws I think this film has, you cannot levy it with being unpassionate in any way.
Oh no, not at all.
There is no one in it who. There's no one in
anything
this.
too full of passion.
Yeah,
it's like
exactly.
brimming over the sides.
It's not like everyone in this isn't committed 100%. They're committed like 3,000%, and they're going fucking nuts.
Absolutely.
The main draw for me is absolutely the visual audio kind of. If this was like maybe like a color silent film, or I kind of think this would work if it was one of those like constantly singing musicals, like Les Mis or
right,
something
where
like that. I think that would have been like maybe really good. Maybe I would have preferred that, but you have like
it would have fit the tone perfectly. Yeah,
the same way the Dracula 30s film kind of falls apart in the middle half. This doesn't fall apart in the middle half quite the same way that film does, but a lot of the weirdest, most kind of baffling shit happens in it. I'm going to talk about the weird werewolf sex scene.
Yeah, one interesting point is, why does he look like a werewolf?
I don't fucking know. I thought at first,
because there's parts in the film,
I thought at first, is he supposed to be a bat?
Right.
But
yeah.
It's not. I then looked up on Wikipedia and it says she sees him having sex with a wolf man.
Right.
Do you reckon they just had a prosthetic suit lying around? They were like, well, someone's going to wear it.
Because I saw some of that in the promotional material, or I think it's in one of the posters in the background. He's like a wolf, and I just thought there was going to be a werewolf in the film, like it was going to be a villain, because they often chuck vampires and werewolves in the same sort of canon. Sure. But no, it's just kind of baffling. And later in the film, he does appear as like a bat creature at one point, he is
several times, right?
Yeah, but there's like that prominent moment where they're trying to corner him in the castle, and he sort of appears in the bedroom with Winona, and then they ambush him, and suddenly he's this like hideous bat creature. Yeah. Which is like a way cooler outfit, by the way. It's like way more sinister and demonic. Whereas the Wolfman one just kind of looks like a man covered in fur.
Well, it's gloriously weird. And there are points of the film where it does like really disturbing, weird shit like that. And it kind of works, like the bit where he offers up his bride's the baby. It's like a very shocking scene for like a film that was, a blockbuster essentially. And we didn't mention the bride's biting Keanu's nipple, as it squirts blood, which was apparently edited out for the American TV version.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Christ. Well, there's a bit where like he's clearly getting like sucked off, and then they just they cut the angle, and then like he's got his trousers on and it's all fine. So it's like I swear down they unbutton his trousers, and then like the next scene there's just the shot. There's just nothing. Anyway, not that I'm disappointed in not seeing Keanu's knob.
It's like, commit, Coppola, you coward.
That was actually really like up until the baby bit. I'm not elated to see babies get killed or anything. But up until that point, that's probably one of the most like sort of out and out horror moments where he's like exploring the castle.
I like that bit a lot though.
It gets quiet, and he's thankful he has to act physically instead of verbally, and it's a lot better for that. And there's a real sense of threat. He walks down into that room that's very it's just like one big bed, isn't it? And then they all like rise like out from under the covers. But that's really cool and really excellent visual effect of
Gary
them
Oldman,
rising.
Crawls around on the ceiling.
Oh yeah, and like they rise out up into the bed and stuff like that, and then there's the weird sex scene that's sort of not a sex scene but somehow more gratuitous than a sex scene would have been. A lot of like
homoerotic vibes as well in this film, like when his brides are about to have their way with Keanu, or potentially eat him. It's not clear, and I guess that's the point. And then Gary Oldman comes out and goes, "No, he's all mine." I was like, ooh.
Yeah.
And then of course there's the hilarious scene where he's shaving, and then like Gary Oldman quickly turns away and licks the blood off of the shaving knife. Yeah. I don't know. I guess this film is kind of less about like you say, the original theme of the book is kind of about sexual tension and in the presence of something foreign, and that's kind of like the concept. And it kind of uses this psychological horror as like obviously a critique of like Victorian or like not I don't know when it came out, maybe not Victorian.
It would have been Victorian, yeah.
It was Victorian, right? Okay, yeah, like that kind of sexual, like
taboos and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Like the kind of how inward and closeted everyone was with their sexuality. It's kind of to critique that.
But it was all just like hidden under the surface.
Exactly.
Everyone was really just like perverted as hell.
This to me, like, it's kind of like a plus for this film. Like, I kind of love how ridiculously horny this is all the time because it makes it makes it really funny and hilarious.
There's that really funny bit at the beginning where like Winona Ryder's friend is like, I know what the men want, and then she like she goes up to like three different men in succession.
Dagger.
Yeah, it's she's like wooing like an American guy, and then like she sees another guy walking that she really likes, and she immediately starts wooing him in front of the American, and then another guy comes in, and then those two guys are sort of like cock blocked at the side going, "Oh, how are you, mate?" "Yeah, I'm not so bad."
Yeah, like I enjoy that element of it where it's just like ridiculously horny, and then you have like the weird scenes with him trying to seduce Winona Ryder. All very weird, and I like the weirdness of it, but then it does kind of remove the horror element because it just kind of becomes a romance film, but a really weird.
Yes.
But it's not really a romance I can invest in because we know Dracula's using mind control on Winona Ryder to an extent, right? Or
yeah.
At least he could be. You could read it that way because he does mind control people. So,
and there's all sorts of supernatural shit going on around it. It's kind of a grey, muddy area, I guess.
So, like, for me, that kind of removes some of the appeal of the story because I mean, like, it's still very fun for me to watch. Like, this is the kind of film where, like, you could be like, "Oh, do you want to watch this?" And there would be very few times where I'd be like, "Oh, I don't want to watch it," because it's
like an absolute roller coaster ride.
Yeah, it's you can blast through 2 hours or whatever it is, like that, because it's just so ridiculous and there's so many scenes I'm waiting to see. But yeah, like the actual horror element of it that I enjoy from other adaptations or just the concept of the story is kind of taken away by making it so
go with
horny.
that.
Yeah,
and how garishly over the top it is. Yeah, or again, kind of softens the horror blow. I think talking of the love story angle of it, I mean, people watching can feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think any of the love stuff's actually in the book. I think his infatuation with like England and like wanting to go somewhere else, it's purely just to sort of like contaminate and make more brides and make more sort of minions, like this idea of like something spreading.
Because he does have the thing about him biting the one girl and then she gets sick, right?
Exactly. And I guess perhaps that was a comparison at the time with syphilis and stuff, because that was a huge problem of the age. Like people would have like horrible crippling illnesses through sex that they had no idea how to cure, so they would just like run. They were running. I guess rampant.
That was like a new social anxiety at the time, right?
Yeah. And a huge taboo because you couldn't talk about it. All these people had like this illness that no one was supposed to be actually having sex in the first place to have it. So I think they've kind of transplanted this love angle into the story to try and make it like this grander tale. And in some aspects it works in like you say, the opening, giving his character that kind of backstory, making him kind of more tragic and relatable. Yeah. On that side of it, it does make him more like more of an interesting character to get to know, rather than just this like mysterious otherworldly threat. He is like a character. But on the other hand, the middle kind of feels a bit bogged down by having to do quite a sort of ultimately kind of a sort of by the numbers love story. Like, sure, there's like complications with him being a vampire, but that's no different to like the complications of Romeo being a Montague or a Capulet. I actually don't remember which one he is. But you know what I mean? Like, the whole star-crossed lovers thing is basically just transplanted Romeo and Juliet.
It's just Twilight.
It's just Twilight. Yeah, exactly. Right.
I mean, like, so, it's not terrible. Like, there's a level of chemistry between Winona Ryder and Gary Oldman.
Sure.
Like, when they eventually do consummate. and then he like turns into a horrible demon, and like because they set up the because they set it up in the prologue, it kind of works. I think the aesthetic they were going for with the romance is, obviously this film resembles like the Hammer and Universal horror films that I mentioned before, but it also kind of it's kind of aesthetically similar to like a lot of the classic epic films that you'd get, like
right.
I can't think of an example off the top of my head. It's you know, something like the way it looks, obviously nothing like Lawrence of Arabia, but like those kind of films where you have massive grand sets and the scale is crazy and it's kind of historical and a period piece, and you know, the love story kind of reminded me of something you might have in one of those kind of films.
I could totally see that.
Or like
Definitely.
Dr. Zhivago or something directed by David Lean, you know.
Okay.
It kind of gave me that impression. Specifically with that prologue, it really kind of sets the tone.
Yeah, yeah.
And that kind of
like
cheesy
a love,
romance.
like a love older than time. Like continents and centuries couldn't separate them. That kind of that epic sort of hero's journey type thing.
Well, apparently Gary Oldman only he agreed to do this role because he wanted to say the line, "I've waded through oceans of time for you, my love," or something. With something he whispers to Winona Ryder, something like that.
Right.
So yeah, like kind of obviously one of the big draws of this film is the romance, and that's kind of a mixed bag for me, which kind of holds back my enjoyment a little. But
it's even on like what.
Sorry, go on.
Sorry, it's even like on one of the posters I saw. It was like it's like the tagline. It's "Love never dies."
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So it was like a big selling point of the film.
I mean, yeah, it kind of, that element of it doesn't completely not work. There's like scenes of it that do work. Like I kind of like the bit where a fucking wolf just gets free in in the like where they go on like a normal date, but like in the Victorian times, where he's like, "I want to go and see a film," and she's like, he's like, "Oh, I hear it's one of the wonders of the world," and they go to like an old timey projection of like, I don't know, a train or something, you know, I don't know what Victorians were watching, and then they come out, so they're kind of going on like a modern day date in the Victorian times, which is kind of hilarious, and then they come out and then the wolf shows up and he kind of like controls the wolf to protect her, but then she gets kind of freaked out. I thought like there are little scenes here and there, and I do like the scene where like she like gives into her like lust for him, and then he like turns into a pile of rats and escapes like that.
Can we just say, I'm glad you brought that up. That is the best image in the whole film, and the most genuinely horrifying moment of the whole film is that actually that it caught me so off guard, and I was like literally just kind of jumped in my seat, not out of fear, but more like, oh fuck yeah, that's sick. Like they did like a thing where him as a demon walks back into the shadows of this room, and they're like, shine the light on him, shine the light, and as he fades into the background, they do like this red light behind his eyes thing, which they never do before or after, but it's a really cool effect because he fades into darkness and you just see the red eyes, and then they shine a light on him and he's suddenly a pile of rats, like a human fleshy form of rats, and they all dissolve and they run off in their separate ways. That's fucking cool.
Yeah, that was great.
That's just one of the coolest images I've seen in a film. Like
I also love all of the stuff with shadows in this film, like the stuff they do,
yes,
where like even when he's not there, like shadows will be like moving around or like reaching out with a hand.
Yeah,
or, like,
yeah.
There's all the opening stuff, even with the awkward Keanu dialogue. If I can just kind of tune it out in the background, I love all the stuff where Gary Oldman will like move away, but his shadow's still.
His shadow's like
coming
clawing
at him.
his
Yeah,
neck.
it's great.
And there's a bit where at the end of the scene where Winona Ryder's like watching her friend like try and like chat up three blokes at once. She's like thinking wistfully about her Jonathan, and then like a dark shadow like covers the screen, and she kind of like looks up into the middle distance, like as though she knows what's approaching her, and then it cuts sort of back to like Dracula, kind of like watching over.
Yeah.
His presence constantly felt, even though he's like not even been introduced to these characters yet. I thought that it's really menacing. Yeah,
this film has such a like weird skew of aesthetics that it's going for, that it almost works because it's like a weird tapestry of like old historical epics mixed with steampunk horror dungeon prisons mixed with like gothic horror castles mixed with Victorian period pieces.
I tell you what, another person it reminds me of, just off the top of my head now, particularly when you mentioned steampunk, like the weird place where Tom Waits is held, the dungeon. You could almost say this film was designed by what's his fucking name? The guy who did Brazil.
Oh, Terry Gilliam.
Terry Gilliam, thank you.
I can kind of see that. Yeah,
he has this penchant for doing weird, steampunk, but also like really garish, over the top sets that are very cartoonish, very bright, very overly stylized.
I would have killed to have seen a Terry Gilliam Dracula, man. That would have. I wouldn't be shocked if that's one of his many projects that's fallen through in the past.
It's weird that this film was made in the 90s in a way. That's kind of the weirdest part of it. Is not that it made in the 90s. It kind of makes sense in that it's just like a director doing what he wants. But in another way, like there's so many contrasting elements. It kind of stands out on its own in terms of like it's weirdly ageless. Like it's clearly from a bygone era, but you could never really pick one era that it truly fits into.
Well, that's what I was saying about like the way they do the effects to look kind of purposefully dated does kind of give it that ageless quality. That's one of the best things about this film.
Yeah, but then you got like weird futuristic kind of steampunky elements to it. Like it does feel like a film lost in like this nebulous, non-existent time.
Yeah, I do wonder what was the purpose of anything in that prison, because you have like the previous guy who went to meet Dracula, Tom Waits, who's now been institutionalized. Renfield, that's right. Yeah, and he doesn't. Like that whole portion of the film, you could have just cut that out. Like it didn't.
Well, I thought a similar thing, and by rights you could, but it's kind of that informs Richard E. Grant's character of like the strange goings on with Mina's friend, who gets bitten by a vampire, which is its own cool portion of the film. We've kind of glossed over entirely Anthony Hopkins and his arrival, which we'll go into in a bit. But then also it serves as like an exposition dump for Winona Ryder's character at the end, or towards the end, where he's like he suddenly decides to warn her about Dracula and about how like he has like a moment of clarity where he's like, I feel so sorry for you, like run, like get away from him if you can. I
don't know, I just kind of, I mean, it was funny to see Tom Waits eating insects, but I don't know, like I mean it kind of looked cool. I feel like that's probably why it was in the film, really.
Right.
They had like a cool storyboard they wanted to do of people with cages on their heads running around a prison.
Yeah, and they had all the budget in the world, so they were just like, fuck it.
Yeah, why
not?
The money's on the screen. Like it looks great.
Yeah. But I mean, in glossing over, in sort of focusing on the love story angle, we have not focused on the mystery angle, which means we've ignored Anthony Hopkins, who rivals Gary Oldman's hammy Dracula performance as one of the most silly, Dutch accents. Van Helsing.
Is he Dutch? I thought he was trying to do a German accent.
Well, because Van Helsing, Van is like a Dutch.
Oh right, thing. Okay. I just thought, I don't know how I feel about Anthony Hopkins in this film, man.
Do you not rate him?
I don't know, man. It's like, it's so on and off. He's like obviously very charming. He's like very fun to watch.
Yeah.
And he talks these like the civilization and the civilization of this. Like it's quite funny, and like, I don't know. He just seemed so. I don't know what it is, but him in this film. I mean, I guess the fact that he kind of comes in later, it's kind of jarring. Be like, oh, what? That's just Anthony Hopkins out of nowhere. Because they obviously save him for like a juicy part. There's really nothing else he can play unless you were going to have him play Dracula in the film.
Which again would have been excellent.
Would have been cool. I'm glad they gave it to Gary Oldman though, nonetheless. But yeah, I don't know how I feel about him in this film. He's certainly funny.
I'm bitterly disappointed to hear that, because to me it feels like once his character arrives, he is kind of like the the counterpoint to Gary Oldman's overacting,
Right.
where he's like giving all this sort of expository dialogue about how serious the threat is, and then he's like really giddy with excitement to find out he's actually dealing with a vampire.
Yeah,
He's
that's kind
like,
of funny.
he's like laughing and provoking the guys. He's like, haha, your fiance's a vampire. I knew it. And he's like, what the fuck's wrong with you, old man?
I do like the scene where he's at the table with Winona and Keanu, and he's like, when you were with the brides of Dracula, did you exchange blood? And then Keanu Reeves is like obviously very embarrassed in front of his now wife. He's like, if you must know, no, I didn't. You know, like him just kind of, he's like, his character's kind of mean. There's that also really weird bit towards the end where like Winona Ryder like kisses him because she's like turning evil.
Oh right, she tries to seduce him. Yeah.
And then, like she's like, I know you think about me, and like, I don't know.
Oh man, oh god, actually, that's one of the funniest. I don't know if it's intentional comedy or not.
It's hard to tell with this film.
One of the best cuts in a film, any film I've seen recently, is in that scene. She's kind of, you know, falling prey to her like more her lustful side because she's like becoming a vampire.
Yeah.
And then they're near the Transylvanian castle, and like the three brides of Dracula turn up and start kind of like threatening him, and he like makes a circle of fire around himself, around both of them.
Yeah.
And then like it hard cuts to like the next day, he goes into the castle while they're sleeping, cuts off all their heads and throws them in the river.
Oh, yeah.
Like quick as anything. It is one of the most like jarringly like quick cuts of like, oh god, this evil, how am I going to survive? It's just like decapitating them.
Yeah, man. Like the violence in this film is great. Although on the last sort of portion of the film, I don't know, the last action scene felt very kind of perfunctory to me, where they're like doing the horse chase.
Right, it's kind of there just because it needs to tie it up.
There was like no tension. It was just like, oh, we'll give Keanu something to do. And then if the film ends quite abruptly as Dracula dies in Winona Ryder's arms, and then it's just kind of...
Yeah, and they do like a kind of love saves everything, because the implication is his soul is saved.
Yeah, he turns kind of into sexy Gary Oldman, no longer the kind of crippling, ugly... he turns into like the old Gary Oldman you see in the prologue, right?
Right. But you know, in a weird way, it almost kind of reminds me of the Darth Vader ending, where like he is forgiven by our lead character, and that suddenly absolves this evil bastard of like murdering thousands, if not like millions of people, just like, you know, mercilessly butchering people as like his unforgiving warlord. It's like, oh yeah, don't worry, love came through in the end. And God is going to save his soul.
This film apparently did set a lot of kind of trends that people now kind of inherently associate with vampires. Like it kind of set, like apparently one of the things was the retractable teeth thing. Vampires basically completely came from this film, and I don't know, so I could be completely uneducated on this. I know Dracula was originally based partly on Vlad the Impaler, right? But was this
somewhat? I think. Yeah,
but was this film like the first to
like put it into like as to like so blatantly state
yeah,
it?
That's what I'm wondering. Like, it seems.
Well, yeah, you know what? I'm not 100% whether like the original Dracula was actually based on Vlad the Impaler. Now you say
I was always under the impression, because I mean, you've read the book. I haven't, so I don't know how much.
They're very vague on it. I mean, the fact that he's like from the east and he's like kind
Transylvania,
of like
right?
He's nobility, but like,
yeah,
it's kind of nebulous. Perhaps that was in the background. But that's the thing. It either was from that, or this film is what popularized it. I couldn't tell you.
Yeah, I mean, as I said before, it is hilarious. I don't know what the motivation was to calling this Bram Stoker's Dracula. Like, this is when really, like, they should have called this like The Wonderful Adventures of Dracula and Friends, because that's kind of like that. The title is very misleading. Like, if you want like a faithful, I could have just imagined like some book nerds going out to see this in the cinema who like love Dracula or whatever.
Just been absolutely insulted
and
by
just
it.
being like battered in the face with Keanu's bleeding nipples and Gary Oldman chewing on things, and just like a random werewolf sex/rape scene and like all this bizarre stuff that just got thrown in. Because yeah, I mean, yeah, as I said, I'm kind of split on this film because there's just elements of it that are just like so entertaining and hilarious, and I love, and bits that I love, like the score, and all of the visuals, and a lot of the direction is just fantastic. All of the effects are brilliant.
Yep.
It's just some of like the story, character, and performances, which, you know, I guess it depends what your tastes are. If you're more into like just the audio visual side of film, which, you know, arguably is more important in a way, because that's kind of what distinguishes film as an art form, right? Is that you get the visuals and the audio. If that's what you want from a film, then this film is. I can absolutely understand why some people see this as like a genuine masterpiece, and I wouldn't laugh if someone said, "Yeah, no, Dracula 1992 is like a genuine masterpiece." I can completely see that, even though it's ridiculous, because like the film is very, very lovingly and brilliantly made in a lot of ways. And if the pantomime performances just kind of suit that aesthetic to you, and the storyline being a little bit ridiculous and silly again suits the aesthetic, I can understand why someone would love it. But personally, like, there's just like a few two elements at play for me to like fully embrace it.
So what do you reckon you'd give it then?
6 out of 10, but it'd be like bordering on a 7. It's like almost a 7. It's like one of the best 6 out of 10 films I've ever seen.
I find there's a lot of 6 out of 10 films that I love, but that aren't like necessarily brilliant films, but the passion that's gone into it, or like there's certain elements of the film that make it incredibly enjoyable, but then it's held back quality wise in like other important areas. For me, I'm feeling similarly, but I'm more inclined to go with a 7. And it could be one of those films that I just decide that I fall in love with, because I was totally drawn in by its charm. And I think, like you say, I think ultimately a lot of it does come down to how you like your films.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of what we come to expect from modern cinema is that everything takes itself very, very seriously. You know, I think a lot of people in our age group would kind of turn their nose up at something like this because it's so silly, really. Ultimately, it is just kind of silly, but it's so loving, like you say, lovingly made. Like, everything is so wonderful about it.
It's closer to Rocky Horror Picture Show.
That's an excellent comparison. A fantastic comparison. I'd give it a 7, and I recommend it to anyone that's that wants like 2 hours of a fucking good time.
Yeah,
basically.
It's a blast. Yeah, it's like a shot of pure adrenaline, really. Like, it is. I can absolutely understand the appeal, but you know, there are some films that you can enjoy, but like in my head, I couldn't put it up to like other films that I've rated higher. I'd say
you could put it high up like a guilty pleasures kind of list.
I'm not guilty about loving this though. This is
you know what I mean.
If someone told me this was a bad film, I would be like, you're wrong. But if they told me it was a masterpiece, I'd be like, I understand you, but I don't agree.
It's going right up on my goofy shit list, along with Aquaman.
This is the Aquaman of the 90s. That's what it is. That's a good comparison, because it is. That's exactly what it is. Because remaking a popular character. I mean, I guess Aquaman wasn't that popular, but doing it in like the most overblown way possible. I guess we'll probably get some other form of Dracula coming down the pipeline at some point.
Well, we've currently just came out earlier this year, the BBC adaptation.
Well, yeah, but I mean like films.
I suppose.
Is it free? Yeah. Is it free license? Does anybody own Dracula?
I don't know. It's probably so old now that it probably has passed into the public domain. I don't know. We'll make one. Fuck it. We'll do it.
Let's fucking do it. I mean, yeah.
We'll do a Christopher Nolan style one for like the modern audience. Do you know what I mean?
Well, wow. That
We'll try and like cram in like a Boeing jet crashing into something.
Yeah,
like,
and we'll make sure.
Instead of Dracula arriving into the country on a boat, he arrives on a plane, and then he kills everyone on the plane, and the plane crashes.
And no one can hear any of the dialogue because someone's playing an organ too loud over it.
Exactly. There you go.
Good shit. Okay, so that about wraps up our 2 reviews. I hope it's been pleasant, and it's my turn to recommend a film to Mr. Adam, who then has to watch it, which
Oh god,
I deeply
This
deeply
is-
enjoy.
the way you're saying this doesn't fill me with hope.
Come on, what do you take me for? Well, what month? It's October next month, so I figured I had to pick a horror film.
Yeah.
And I was looking at horror films that I wanted to rewatch, and horror films that you probably haven't seen, and I'm pretty sure you haven't seen. Oh, I know you haven't seen this film. I'm going to recommend Cure, which came out, I believe, 1998, 1999. It's a classic Japanese horror film, and I only saw it earlier this year.
Okay.
97. And the reason I pick it is because I would say me and you both with quite horror film. We both love horror films, and
Right,
this
yeah,
is we love our schlock. We love our schlocky horror films. Shaun of the Dead, and Dracula, the one we just watched. This would absolutely count. The schlocky, silly horror films. But this is a horror film that I found genuinely scary. So I wanna see if you share the same opinion. So
Wow. Okay. If you found it genuinely scary, then I'm kind of worried about watching it. To be honest. You've got quite a good stomach for these things.
yeah, I'm interested to see what you think of it. It's very, very strange. I mean, a lot of J horror is quite jarring, and this is certainly a highlight of that genre. So if you want to not be spoilt for the next episode, I highly recommend you watch it. Cure, directed by what's his name, Kiyoshi Kurosawa. So the other very famous Japanese director called Kurosawa, and he's quite a popular, famous director. Who's done very, very, very prolific. Not quite. What's his name? The guy who did Audition. What's his name? Fucking.
Miike?
Yeah,
Takashi
Takashi
Miike?
Miike. Not quite that prolific, but still pretty fucking prolific. So, I'll be keen to see what you think of that. And then I guess we'll also have to figure out some other release that we'll be watching and reviewing.
Well, if with any luck, hopefully it will be Tenet, because you'll be able to get out.
Yes, hopefully it will be Tenet, and we might have some other stuff out in the meantime. If you've made it this far, that's your insider information.
So yeah, to combat our, like this week we had obscure like Charlie Kaufman film and big bright Dracula from the 90s. Next time we'll have big bright Tenet and obscure Japanese horror film from the 90s.
Yeah, it'll be good, and we might have we'll have another video out in the meantime that won't be a podcast. So, if you're keen to see that, watch that, and I guess if you want to see it, you'll have to subscribe to the channel.
Fuck you. Fuck, don't you dare.
And smash the like button.
Smash that like button. No, fuck. God, no.
Ding the notification bell.
Oh, fucking hell.
I hate myself. Adam, you did this.
I regret everything.